What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, August 25th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Pauhana Friday, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room as usual. And, of course, today being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. Obviously, the big story right now is Hurricane Harvey is just about to make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. 110-plus mile-per-hour winds, 35 inches of rain. It is going to be a nasty one. They're already ordering evacuations, and if you have not already made your preparations and you're in that path of the storm, it's too late. Stay home. Don't get on the roads. Don't go to the hardware stores. You just go with what you've got here right now. And, of course, later in the weekend, it's going to get up into the interior of Texas, including RBN. And I have an announcement to all of our listeners from RBN. Will the owner of a large wooden boat, 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits, kindly move it because your animals are starting to block traffic? We need to get that all out of there. There is a concern, of course, at the South Texas Nuclear Project power plant down near Corpus Christi. Now, obviously, the reactor is built to withstand a storm to a certain degree, but then so were all those nuclear reactors on Japan. And apparently they're keeping an eye on the storm, and they're getting ready, if necessary, to shut the reactor down and do whatever is necessary. But they're a little nervous, especially after what happened to Fukushima. And so they're going to be keeping an eye on that. Like those poor people in the Gulf have not already suffered through enough with that Gulf oil disaster and the rest of it here. Now, as you know, over this last week, we've had Charlottesville, racism, and all this other stuff, and it's already beginning to fizzle. And everyone's wondering why was this being made up anyway? It's not like it was going to get traction. Well, it was a distraction. And we're beginning to see a pattern emerge where the Democrats and the media will launch a smear campaign against Donald Trump, and then when it falls apart, they have another one set to go. So the news is never about how Trump was exonerated on something. It's always about, oh, there's a new scandal on out there. First it was Trump in Russia. That one's falling apart. Now that dossier, which we all knew was fake, even the corporate media is admitting it's fake. Well, let's go on to Charlottesville and prove that Donald Trump is a racist. And so they're trying to crank up that whole situation to just keep on the attack there. Now, believe it or not, there's a story over here in beforeitsnews.com where apparently down in Texas, there's actually somebody trying to make the argument that it's time to bulldoze the Alamo because it's a reminder of that time when those racist Americans didn't like the Mexicans. Actually, the Alamo is an icon of when the Mexican army defeated the American army. They won the battle, but obviously not the war. But again, you can see the mission creep here. We must destroy this monument memorial has gone way beyond the original idea that we want to get rid of the reminders of slavery. And now they're just attacking all history. The Alamo, the Confederacy, the Union, Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson. And by the way, there's a lot of hoax nonsense stories out there trying to trip us all up. The latest one being that apparently some Confederate soldiers were being exhumed from a cemetery. And it's a hoax story. So you've got to be very, very careful about these things here. But, I mean, it has reached a ridiculous point of view. And you look at the corporate media and the Democrats ever since Trump won the White House, and Trump's a Russian, Trump's a racist, now Trump's a retard. They're back to talking about using the 25th Amendment to get him out because he's incompetent. They seem to be going through the R words right now. And I guess next it'll be the S words. Trump is Satanistic. Trump is snoring. Trump is whatever. They're just going on down the list here. Now, as you know, we talked about earlier in the week, there is an attorney down in San Diego who is going to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of the American people against CNN for defaming us by saying we're white supremacists by default. that anybody who voted for Donald Trump is a white supremacist. And of course, CNN has no defense for labeling 63 million Americans white supremacists by default. They haven't even tried to retract or modify it. They're still out there pushing this idea. If you support President Donald Trump, you are a white supremacist. And it's a ridiculous assertion to make. A lot of people supported Donald Trump for economic reasons. I supported him primarily to keep Hillary out of the Oval Office, and secondarily because he was going to pull back from the war agenda, and that didn't happen. But it doesn't make me a white supremacist. And I hope that lawyer goes forward with that lawsuit, because CNN ought to be sued for being that reckless. And CNN is, in fact, in difficult trouble. Their ratings have plummeted a minus 48% from this time last year. They're now in 15th place. They used to be number 1. Now they're in 15th place. They're behind reruns of old TV shows. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And the corporate media is still out there. They're getting more and more hysterical. And, of course, that's actually a good thing, because more and more people are just saying, what is it with the TV network news that we're not getting any news? We're getting all this nonsense, this whining and crying stuff going on out there. Russia Today has an interesting article out there basically talking about how dissent in American media is being made illegitimate. And they're talking about those few remaining voices in the corporate media that are trying to toe a cautious line and say, it's not as bad as you think. They're not going along with the bash Russia. And what Russia Today is suggesting is if dissent is declared illegitimate, you could see riots in this country. And yes, you could. And now you have Nancy Pelosi is out there saying there have to be limits on First Amendment. You can't just get out there and say anything you want. Well, yeah, that's what the First Amendment is about. Free speech is an absolute. It either is or it is not. If there are constraints on speech, it's not freedom of speech, it's permitted speech. Now, getting on back to the scandal with the Aiea brothers, as they dig into the investigations on that, apparently the Aiea lived a good life in Washington, D.C. They had bundles of cash. They were spending like $4,000 per night in Washington, D.C., hitting all the clubs, hitting all the various entertainments and so forth and so on. So a lot of cash floating on out there. Now, as you know, we reported yesterday, federal prosecutors are starting to look into the issue of espionage by Imran Awan, and there may be a deal to be made there. So I hope they have him in protective custody. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters finally stepped over the line. The House Ethics Committee on Monday has charged Representative Maxine Waters of helping a bank in which her husband owns stock to secure federal bailout funds. And this basically comes to 3 counts of violating House rules and the Federal Ethics Code in connection with her effort to arrange a 2008 meeting between Treasury officials and representatives of the One United Bank. Maxine. All right, so let's get into the war zones. And it does look like Trump is trying to ramp things up here. They just hit, well, basically, let's get back to this issue of the legality here. Article that came out of FFF.org. When you come right on down to it, Donald Trump does not have a legal right to go into Afghanistan. Just the same argument was made about North Korea the other day. It's illegal. There's no justification. And in both the case of North Korea and Afghanistan, there's so many wars I can't keep track of them. Congress has not issued the required constitutional declaration of war. And that makes so many of these wars launched by presidents unconstitutional and illegal. But they keep on going. Another article coming on out, this one from Sputnik News, warning us that the amount of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan may be much greater than we're being told. And that was certainly true in Vietnam. That was certainly true in Vietnam. And apparently a former State Department official told Sputnik News that the U.S. Defense Department is trying to obscure the true number of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Now then, boy, there's a lot of military stuff out there turning and burning here. Ukraine just had their Independence Day parade, and for the first time, NATO members were represented. They had NATO units in the Ukraine parade, and the parade was watched by defense ministers who came to the Ukrainian capital from all over the world, including James Mattis, the head of the Pentagon. So they're really cranking up there. Now, all is not going well for U.S. hegemonic domination. As you know, not too long ago, everybody decided they were going to whoop on Qatar. Tiny little Qatar, we're going to go on in there, and they've got natural gas, and they're tiny, and we can all whip on them. But apparently Qatar has now restored full diplomatic relations with Iran, and that's going to change that dynamic in that area. More and more countries pivoting away from the United States. Now, Jared Kushner is over in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. Kushner has gone over there to meet with the Palestinian officials in hopes of sealing this ultimate deal that Trump has been so ardently talking about ever since taking office. There will be peace in the Middle East. And the protesters are out there saying Americans are not welcome, and basically expressed disappointment with the Trump administration and its Israel first approach, which we can understand. By the way, if you're in those occupied illegal Israeli settlements and it's a hot day, it turns out Ben & Jerry's ice cream is being sold there, which I think violates some sanctions and embargoes. Speaking of sanctions and embargoes, Japan has imposed unilateral sanctions on 8 foreign entities over North Korea. And again, you have all these foreign entities who are saying, why are you punishing us for what you're thinking North Korea is up to? It's kind of a shotgun approach, and it's ultimately not going to work. Let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike, you know, it's so obvious how they get the script that Trump is unhinged, because I don't know anybody who uses that word, and that's all you heard on all the networks. He's unhinged. So right there, that tells you they get these talking points that goes out to all the media networks to say he has dementia or he's unhinged. I mean, even to the point where the Democrat strategists and Republican strategists on CNN, because, remember, people, there is no Democrat and Republicans anymore. They're all globalists. These people are getting a paycheck. So, that's the whole point. There is no parties anymore, Mike. We talked about this before, and that's why they get their talking points. Both parties have the same talking points now, and you can tell it's out in the open.
Well, I think there's one of these TV talk hosts, I think it's Conan O'Brien, who keeps doing these segments about the independent news, and they'll have these clips from all these small local TV stations across the country, and they're all saying exactly the same thing, one right after the other. And it does hammer home the point. Yes, they're all reading from the same script.
It's just sad how this is what we've become, Mike. It's just so obvious now. Like, I watched the rerun of that Alison Camara, whatever her name is, on CNN with the Pulse of the People.
Yeah.
And what a joke. I mean, it was so obvious. I mean, whoever did that stuck her with that. I think they're not working at CNN anymore. Whoever got that Pulse of the People panel together, they must have did that on purpose to make Allison look like a fool.
Well, there is another possible explanation, and that is that the corporate media in general are running out of people who can be easily fooled. And they'll set up a panel, and no, that doesn't work, we'll set up another panel, and they can't find anybody that fits the old model of just being so impressed at being at CNN that they'll just go along with the nonsense. People are getting angry over the fact that they're being lied to, and I don't blame them one bit.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to move to the Navy ships that people need to remember. there's lookouts. Like,
yeah.
So the whole, it was hacked. It's just a non-issue because there's lookouts. So, I mean, yeah, the Russians could have, electronic countermeasures to do a GPS thing, but not to steer the ship per se. Mm-hmm. And you would have lookouts to say, hey, there's a cargo ship or an oil tanker we're heading towards, let's
but
move.
they're really pushing this. They're trying to go back to Russia's the bad guy, and Russia did this. It's all over the corporate media, and even a lot of the independent media. Alex Jones is on this thing where the ships were hacked, and Coast to Coast AM is saying, oh, yeah, there's no question about it. And their argument is the Navy could never be that incompetent, hence it must be, by default, a Russian attack. But let's talk about naval incompetence here. Let's recall the story of the USS William D. Porter, whose very first mission after launching was to escort the USS Iowa across the Atlantic. This is in World War II. And while pulling out of port for the first mission, the Porter dragged its own anchor across the deck of the ship moored next to it, ripping off railings, lifeboats, and weapons. They hadn't had the anchor all the way up into its mounting before they started pulling out. Now, 24 hours later, the Porter is cruising along as the escort for the USS Iowa, and the captain decided his young crew needed more drills in anti-submarine warfare because German U-boats were in the area. And in the process of trying to set up this training, a live depth charge fell off the rack, rolled across the deck, and plunged into the Atlantic. And the detonation sent the fleet into a panic with the ship starting back and forth looking for their attackers. Okay? So the captain of the Porter had to call up the Iowa and say, that was ours, we're sorry all about that. Then the Porter gets hit with a freak wave, and because there'd been a hatch that was left unsecured, the boiler room was flooded. So they had to stop and make repairs and pump things out, then speed off to catch back up with the Aiea. And they arrived just as the Aiea was running a training exercise in which balloons were released to be shot at with anti-aircraft guns. The Porter decided to try and redeem itself by shooting at the balloons that drifted too far from the Aiea. And then the captain of the Porter made his biggest mistake. He ordered a practice firing of a torpedo, which launched a live torpedo at the USS Aiea. This is all true. And the fleet thought they were under attack. There were U-boats around, and the USS Iowa barely managed to evade the torpedo. Everyone was looking for a U-boat, and once again, the Porter had to fess up. Oh, and by the way, did I mention President Franklin Roosevelt, the Secretary of State, and the Joint Chiefs were all on the USS Iowa, headed for Tehran, and they're meeting with Stalin and Churchill. So at this point, the Porter was ordered to leave the fleet and head for Bermuda, where the entire crew was arrested by the Marines. The USS Porter was then exiled to the Aleutians, where they managed to accidentally fire an artillery shell into the front lawn of the base commander in the middle of a party. Well, having messed that up, the Porter was sent down to the war in the Pacific, and aside from strafing her sister ship at the Battle of Okinawa, managed to actually start killing the people she was supposed to kill, including a kamikaze pilot who was diving on them until the Porter's guns shot it down. In the ensuing cheering and celebration, nobody on the Porter noticed that the Porter was sailing right across where the kamikaze plane had sunk, and the resulting explosion sank the USS Porter. This is all true. You can look it up for yourself. So, yes, the Navy can be just that incompetent.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah.
I wanted to just switch gears one more time to China, how they have the world's fastest train that does 248 miles an hour, and that just proves that that's the new empire. They're the #1 economy in the world, and they use, we talked about this, they use more concrete in 3 years than we used in 100. So everything is shifted to Asia. Most of the world's population's over there. China's got as much as the middle class is as big as our entire country's population. And we got homeless people living in tents in L.A. now, like on the side of the highways. I mean, we're in decline. You got stabilization going on here.
We are in decline. I'll tell you what, stay on the line. I'm going to bring you back for some follow-up on exactly why that decline is happening. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dustin, and the reason Asia, China are happening places is they have been taking the money they're making from manufacturing and they're putting it into infrastructure. Now, when you invest in infrastructure, you're going to get a return over the years. nice roads to deliver cargo on, factories to build things, agricultural areas to grow food in, and you get an immediate return. If you are a militarist country and you are spending the wealth of the nation building up huge stockpiles of weapons, and you don't actually have a war to fight, then all of that investment literally sits in the desert corroding down to nothing. You should go into Google Earth sometime and look at the Boneyard out in Arizona. It's just this gigantic swath of land on which all of these very expensive warplanes are corroding away. And they were built, they flew around, they looked tough. Very few of them saw actual combat, and then they're simply abandoned to rot away. And that is really the difference between the two countries. Russia and China spend far less on the military, and that means they have far more to spend on things like these high-speed trains. And by the way, that Chinese train, that speed that you quoted, is the maximum speed it's allowed to do because of the current rail system. It can actually go considerably faster. When you are running a railroad, the tracks come with ratings. How much weight they can stand, and more to the point, how fast you can take a train down them because of the issues of flexion. And if you look at some of those modern rail systems, you'll see those rails are just locked down really tight onto the ground. They have to be. All right, so Dustin, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I got to say one thing. I'm in the path of Harvey.
Okay, hunker down.
Oh, yeah, I have. I got plenty of water, and the nice thing about it is, if you're smart enough, like I was, it's more like, I know, like, the shelves are wiped out, but I knew, being in the business, stocking shelves and stuff, I knew when the trucks were coming in, so I was able to get, top off whatever I needed. And I would just recommend, after the storm passes, do not give to the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation to say they're going to rebuild Texas.
Yes, absolutely on that one. And again, if there is massive flooding, and it does seem like there's going to be, one of the biggest, most tragic mistakes that was happening down in Hurricane Katrina is people would be in their house and they'd go from the first to the second floor. Then they'd go up to the attic, and then once that staircase was flooded, they were trapped. And eventually they would drown in that attic roof area. So unless your attic has some way of getting outside it, or you have an axe up there, don't make that mistake. So again, go ahead.
Well, the thing is, what I'm talking about, some people don't see this as because President Trump, he's ahead of the, he's trying to get ahead of the storm, trying to get everything deployed in place, ready to go in when the storm clears. And the thing is, this can be one of his big things he's going to unite the country behind. Making sure, people come together and get the provisions ready, and get donations ready for people down in Texas who need it.
Well, obviously we remember the disaster of Katrina. It took them like a week to get fresh water down there. And the National Guard went in, brandishing their weapons. And I remember the video of the National Guard commander saying, "Put those guns down. We're here to help these people." And this would be an opportunity for Trump to show that, he can take charge of a situation and get things done. I don't want to politicize it. Obviously, our concern are all these people who aren't in the path of this terrible storm. And I'm looking at the weather radar right now. As it's over Round Rock, Texas, and RBN's headquarters. And apparently, according to Mike in the control room, the parking lot is starting to actually flood. So we'll see. It's going to be a bad one, Well,
one of my concerns is too. It's more like I can see the bureaucracy, the never Trumpers or the behind networks that Obama left behind. I can just see them trying to bungle up the relief efforts like they did in Katrina and try to blame it on Trump and make him look bad. Yeah,
there are people who would actually do that. They would want to mess things up in order to make Trump look bad. And it's amazing how callous they are with other people's lives. Anyway, George, we're going to let you go here. We're going to take another break for commercials. We've got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media, of course, is totally focused on the hurricane. And in this case, it's fully justified. This is going to be a nasty one. And I've been through 2 hurricanes myself, once through the eye, and so it gets very, very intense. And I'm looking at the weather radar over RBN, and it looks like it's going to let up a little bit, and then a major section of the storm is coming in a little while. All right, let's get back to the phones here. Mark in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Great to speak with you again.
Thank you.
Well, Mike, yes, sir. Thank you. Not my main reason for calling, but I wanted to mention about the Hurricane Harvey. Alex, he follows things closely, especially close to home, and
yes,
said from what he's read, this hurricane is carrying a lot of water, and at times it could actually rain several inches per minute. It's tremendous in size, and they're looking at 40 inches per hour in some areas. So, yeah, it's like something I don't think we've ever seen before because of its size and the water density.
It will be one for the record books. There's no question about it. And all I can say to everybody who's listening, who's in the path of this storm, don't take any dumb chances. Err on the side of caution. This is the real deal. This isn't a TV show. This isn't cosplay. This is real Mother Nature coming on in, and you got to be prepared to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, I think Mother Nature's being steered here, Mike. I don't know what you've researched and how you feel about weather warfare. But
oh, you're not going to say that Putin is sending this storm into Texas, are you? Okay. That's a little bit.
I'm only asking you, your opinion. So I won't go into it because there's a tremendous amount of evidence that it's a reality. But
I have not seen any evidence that at all convincing. And if you understand the scale of the energy required to, first of all, create one of these storms, you would also understand the amount of energy it takes to in any way alter or steer it. The only exception to that I'm aware of is out here in Hawaii, where a hurricane will come across the southern part of the Big Island, and that huge thermal updraft from the volcano will tear the storm apart. But it doesn't direct it in a direction. It simply disrupts the cyclonic airflow. And then you have to look at how much energy is involved in that lava, the thermal energy coming out of the volcano. I've never seen any convincing evidence for it whatsoever. And again, right now, our top priority is to make as many people who are in the path of this storm understand this is not a game. Have your water, your food, your batteries, and just be prepared to hunker on down because it is going to be a nasty one. Okay?
I think most everybody, all the good people in Texas, have got good common sense to be prepared or to evacuate if needed. Mike, to go on to other things that are much more immediate, that are in our near future relative to the plans of the illuminists for our country in particular, going through September into October and toward the end of September, but really predominantly in October. According to the sources that Doug Hagman, if you followed his work at all, related on Alex Jones's show this morning, sources being in the White House at highest levels as well as the press at the biggest papers, including the propaganda media. Now, the press is being instructed at or board meetings or whatever they call their confabs, where they make their plans on a day-to-day basis of what to publish. They have been talking for several months now, if not longer, about the different stages that they're being instructed to go through, they being the editors and such, to get their marching orders from the CIA, basically. You know how the chain of command works these days.
Well, can we sort of like get to the point you're trying to make, because you're kind of rambling around here?
Well, I'm just leading up to what the information is, basically.
Yes.
That is, they've gone through different stages. They've gone through the Russia stage. They've gone through and are still in the dementia stage, the Alzheimer's beginning stages stage.
The racist stage.
The what?
The racist stage.
The racist stage. And these are holding patterns while they're organizing, actually training quite a few thousand people across the country. And they've been doing this for 3 months or more. And they were planning on bringing them out in early July. If you remember, there was talk of that. There was going to be widespread demonstrations in this country back in early July. There was talk, and it never happened. But they've really been training quite a few people, and more as time has gone on since early July. And they're training in firearms. They're training in martial arts. They're actually training people to be out and to really do damage and get really physical in the near future. This is to happen in October by the current plans. They being the Rothschilds and the Vatican and the Black Royalty of Europe and maybe some others that are directing the CIA, the black hats in the CIA, not the white hats.
Okay, well, you're falling into a propaganda trap that so many other people have. That that the authors of everything that's going on are unreachably remote on the other part of the world, the Vatican or the Bilderbergers or whatever. When you're dealing with CIA drug corruption, it's right here in this country, right in front of us. Now, in terms of an overthrow of this country, they've been trying to start race riots all the way back to Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. It doesn't work because the American people understand. Based on the history of COINTELPRO, the American people understand that's what the U.S. government is trying to do, split us up. And they're not getting traction. And they're not even getting traction with this latest round from Charlottesville. The only people showing up for these riots are the ones who are being paid to be there. And so that one's beginning to fizzle. And so what are they going to move on to from here next? Russia, racist, retarded, what comes next in the sequence? But they're not gaining any traction. They're not winning popular support for the idea of changing the presidency or the government. Okay?
Coming up next, if they didn't get traction on that plan that they not going to give up. You know that.
Well, we can wear them down. I mean, at some point, they're going to start running out of money. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go.
All right, Mike. We'll see. God bless you.
All right, we're going to switch over to Richard in New York. Richard, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I heard you briefly mention the USS Porter and some history of that regarding involvement with the USS Iowa and all sorts of other mishaps and other things. There's been 8 USS Porters. I was just wondering which vessel designation were you referring to?
It was the William D. Porter, and I mean you can find the story in WikiLeaks. It's all over the place.
Do you have a vessel designation DD?
Not at hand. I'd have to go back and hunt that down.
Okay, I was just wondering what your links were for that, because I find that very interesting, and I just wondered, and I just figured I'd question you because I've never heard of this story before.
Well, you can just Google U.S. Navy almost torpedoed President Roosevelt, and you'll get a bunch of links. In fact, we have it on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com in far more detail. I actually got twigged onto the story from a segment of Mysteries at the Museum, where they were showing the special bathtub that had to be installed in the USS Iowa for Franklin Roosevelt because he couldn't stand up to take a shower.
Right. Okay, well, that's all I got, Mike. I was just going to ask you and see if you had that. I'll look it up.
Yeah, there is an article with more detail on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. But if you dig for it, it's easy to find. Obviously, it's not something that the Navy is particularly proud of. Okay, we're going to switch over to Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, actually, there's 2 things here. You remember when Obama went to Afghanistan and all the military had their basic weapons removed from them?
Yeah, well, I think they took the bolts out.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was kind of funny. I sent you that link last night there about how they were inspecting all the Ukrainian forces before that parade. So Poroshenko couldn't have any accidents.
Well, you know, Poroshenko got a credible death threat just earlier in the week here. He has to know a lot of his people don't like him. He's an installed puppet ruler. Puppet rulers are generally not popular.
You know what gets me about that, though, Mike? You know, when the feds built that fence over there using U.S. dollars, Congress had no problem with that. And, I'm a firm believer, though, that, as was heard basically on RBN yesterday, that, when people start demanding things and you've got an overt type of scenario to where, well, we're not going to give it to you, we're going to hold up on it, that wall, in fact, might be not to keep people out, but to keep them in with this globalist agenda. And the more you think of that, it's kind of like the police state. When you have the FBI doing all this domestic terrorism, or creating it, and then you get the NDAA and Patriot Act for people to start demanding more security, this might be some other agenda behind that.
Well, my thought from the globalist point of view is it is not enough for Middle Eastern and African migrants to come into the United States of America. The indigenous Americans need to also start moving to other parts of the world. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to complete the homogenization of the human race. So certainly the globalists are not on board with the building of any walls. They want the borders completely wide open.
Well, it's like that you have on your site right now, that link there about the Arizona wall being built.
Yes.
If you recall, in a flashback, an Israeli firm is building that wall.
Yes.
It's not going to American jobs. And that's what makes me mad, because of all the millions and millions of Americans that are unemployed, you'd think they'd have first bid at those jobs.
Well, we'd like to see that, but again, Congress gets to spend the money, and Congress is beholden to Israel. And let's be honest, Israel has a lot of experience in building these walls.
That's a hard way of saying it, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, you and Claire have a wonderful weekend, okay?
Thanks an awful lot. We're gonna try and get some rest. We're just totally on burnout. And we're going to switch over to Michelle in Quebec. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon, Michael. Hello. Bonjour, Quebec. I was just wondering, I heard something, I don't recall if it was you or John Fadmiller on your game, and I quote, the way things are run right now in the United States, it's to wonder if we all did for the hour could depend.
Okay, Michelle, I need two things from you. I need your mouth closer to the telephone microphone and slow down, because your phone call is breaking up and we're having a hard time understanding you.
Okay, I'm on this. As far as getting closer, I can't get any closer. I'll see if I can slow down the pace. What I was wondering is that that argument was made of the fact that Mr. Trump doesn't seem to do a lot of the things he promised during campaigning. And I was wondering what's the amount of things that Barack Obama didn't do once president, as opposed to what he had promised during his campaigning, which gave me the idea of wondering maybe your coup d'etat happened during George W. Bush's presidency. And you're right in the smack of it right now.
Well, most historians think the coup d'etat happened with the John F. Kennedy assassination. And the Bushes and the Clintons have been buddy-buddy ever since the 1980s cocaine and gun running operation by the CIA out of Arkansas. But in terms of okay, here's the thing. We're seeing this power elite, and they're all tied up with all this drug money. And they have grabbed themselves a country. We're being run effectively by drug lords, organized crime, and they're acting like it. Oh, goody, we've got the guns. We can go into Afghanistan. We can go into Syria and continue the war agenda. Did you have something else you wanted to ask?
No, okay. I was just give my sympathy to all the people down in the south that's about to be hit by a hurricane.
Yeah.
The worst we get over here are snowstorms, and God knows we had a whopper in 1998. But we'll keep them all in our prayers. And hello to Clara.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call, and that was very, very hard to understand what was being said, and I'm trying to sort of guess and fill in the gaps here. Alrighty, so the phone lines are open right now. We can go back to news about the war zones here. And apparently Russia is now deploying nuclear-capable bombers near Korea. Now, an earlier report had said Russia was flying over North Korea, which didn't make a lot of sense. But that's what's, they're apparently just putting their bombers in the region to sort of reach parity with all these other nuclear-capable bombers being put in there by the United States. North Korea is not a done issue. It's still brinksmanship over it. And Russia, I think, is joining China in sending a message saying, if the U.S. tries to attack North Korea without a good reason, we will intervene. Which means the U.S. is thinking about a false flag, something they can blow up and say, oh my goodness, look what North Korea did here. Meanwhile, the U.S. is going to build a new gigantic radar system on the island of Palau. Actually, it's 500 islands and islets in Oceania. And they're going to allow the Pentagon to put up a radar system there to keep an eye on North Korean aggression. I don't know. It looks to me like the U.S. is the aggressor. Kind of all over the place there. Now, yesterday we were talking about how the U.S. government has gone to, I think it was Grumman and Lockheed, for a replacement for the Minuteman III silo-launched intercontinental ballistic missile. And apparently today, the Air Force has struck a very hush-hush deal with Lockheed for new cruise missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go back to the telephones here. Terry in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Some theory that, or somebody thought, or he had some kind of evidence to think that Trump is sending these troops to Afghanistan to get rid of those poppy fields since he's got a little riff with the CIA going and bring the country back from that drug situation you just talked about.
I'm sorry, that's your theory?
Not mine. I just want to get your comment on it because somebody expressed it on one of the programs I was listening to.
Well, I would say nonsense. I mean, they could go in and eradicate the poppies from the air. They don't need troops on the ground to do that. They could hit those fields with Agent Orange. I mean, the Taliban eradicated opium production following the departure of the Soviet Union. So it can be done. The thing that is very irksome are all these photos showing U.S.-led coalition forces, including U.S. troops themselves, guarding and protecting those opium poppies and then handling the sacks of the raw opium. No, I don't think those troops are going into Afghanistan to eradicate the opium poppies. I think the U.S. government is desperate not to be seen to be losing any of these many conflicts they're involved with, because that will yank the rug out from the rest of the war agenda. And so they're going to pour money and other people's children into Afghanistan for however long it takes. And all the time they'll say, we haven't lost yet, we haven't lost yet, we haven't lost yet. Just like in Korea, 60 years, we haven't lost yet. Yeah, well, you haven't won either. So I think that's what that's all about. I've had a lot of disappointments with President Trump. I still do not think he would be comfortable with the idea that the CIA is one of the biggest drug cartels in the world.
Right, that's why I thought maybe there might be something to that. I was hoping there was, but do you think he's given in to the deep state and given up?
He's somehow controlled. I mean, President Trump has the authority to fire the director of the CIA at any time for whatever reason. John F. Kennedy fired Alan Dulles following the Bay of Pigs, which is why a lot of people were wondering why Alan Dulles wound up in that Warren Commission.
Yeah, well, Alan Dulles got fired and he just moved to a different location than CIA, even though he wasn't getting a paycheck and still running the organization. And, of course, Kennedy paid dearly for it, you know, and Kennedy was also going to let Hoover retire from the FBI and that was another thing. And of course, he had some kind of thing with the Secret Service because they backed off in Dallas, and then he was going to. He's playing with these Treasury, this Treasury money instead of the Federal Reserve notes.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to put inspectors in Diamona in Israel to make sure that they didn't get a nuclear weapon because he didn't want an arms race started in the Middle East.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who did not like John F. Kennedy.
Exactly, and he paid the price.
Yep.
Okay, Mike, I appreciate your insight there. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and there's the music for our top of the hour station break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show again, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go to Paul in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, a moment or two ago, you mentioned radar being put up in Palau.
Yes.
And my question is all of those expensive military satellites that NASA put up in the air, what are they doing, and why is the need for radar? And I'll listen to your answer on the air.
Okay, well, first of all, except for the use of the space shuttle, NASA does not put that much of the military's hardware into orbit. To this very day, the military maintain their own separate parallel space program at places like Vandenberg and over here at the Pacific Missile Test Range, where they can put up their own satellites like that secret space shuttle and so forth and so on. Now, that being said, all satellites have a life expectancy and a cost of doing business. And again, this new radar in Palau, the first I heard about it was, well, gee, what are they going to do with that giant floating radar platform that used to be here in Pearl Harbor, which is supposedly over there right now? But it's a case of building another facility to have defense in depth, because if this really does go to a shooting war, it's a pretty good bet that the United States is not the only country that has developed a working anti-satellite weapon. Now, using those would be an absolutely dumb thing to do, because you could turn low Earth orbit into this shrapnel field that will make space unreachable by the human race for 100 years into the future. But people who plan for wars, they don't think like that. They just need to win now, and, you know, it's somebody else's problem to deal with the cleanup. I remember in the early days of the space program when the U.S. was experimenting with passive communication satellites, and one of them was called Echo, and it was this gigantic balloon, illuminized, and it was just absolutely brilliant in the sky. And then the Air Force wanted to come out with another idea of literally putting a ring of these orbiting needles around the Earth. And a lot of people said, no, that is going to have long-term consequences. So, again, how short-sighted military can be. Do you remember when John F. Kennedy used to say that it should be the goal of our nation before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth? There was a reason for that last part, because the military were actually proposing an idea where they would get a volunteer for a one-way mission to the moon. They'd get him up there, he'd plant the flag, then he'd take a pill, but at least we'd beat the Russians. And Kennedy understood that the general population wouldn't be very sympathetic to that. And so every time Kennedy made his speech about the race to the moon, he always included that part and returning him safely to the Earth. And he basically allowed the civilian NASA to stay in charge of the moon program here. All right, let's move on over to the economic news. The big central bankers are meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming today to basically plan their next round of skullduggery. Janet Yellen gave a speech and once again was out there saying that there does need to be a return to some regulation and control to rein in Wall Street. Now, this, of course, is directly contradictory to Donald Trump's stated policy of no regulation for business whatsoever. He himself, coming out of the world of business, I'm sure he's had to deal with the paperwork and the headaches. But again, he's thinking only in terms of the money junkies or himself, and not realizing or not caring just how out of control the fraud on Wall Street has reached. But a lot of people are saying that Yellen's speech at Jackson Hole may mean she'll never get another term as chairman of the Fed. Maybe she just wants to retire. Who knows? Okay. Now, yesterday we were talking about this story where Germany had come on out and said that they had brought all of their gold bullion back from the Bank of France. And apparently that was being reported in a way to make the German people think that all of their gold bullion had been returned. And that is not true. Much of it is still tangled up at the New York Federal Reserve. And for some reason, the German media wants to convince the German people that's not an issue anymore. But we do know it's an issue. And it may well be that the New York Federal Reserve has taken Germany's gold and leased it out the back door. It's still on the books, and now they can't get it back, which may mean that somewhere down the road we're going to see a repeat of Roosevelt's ban on gold. Turn in your gold at the nearest bank. We'll give you $40 an ounce for it, or whatever it's going to be. But that's what happened before. And again, it's sacrificing the wealth of the people to protect the banks. Because the New York Federal Reserve was supposed to just store the gold, not take it someplace else. I remember when this question about the missing gold bars first surfaced, there was an editorial over at CNBC where the editorial writer literally came on out and said, it doesn't matter if the gold is not there. We have it on paper, and as long as it's on paper, then for all practical purposes, it's there. No, it isn't. And Germany understands this, which is why they want their gold back. And they're not getting back the original gold bars they sent over. They're getting back some other gold bars, which aren't even as pure. Now, the way a gold depository works is like the safety deposit box at your bank. You're renting that. You're paying the bank a fee for that. And you open up the box and you can put things in there. Backup disks for your important data, inherited jewelry, a moon pie, who knows, who cares? The idea being that it closes up, goes back in the vault, and somewhere down the road you can come on in, get that box out, open it again, and the exact same items are in there. Backup disks for software, heritage jewelry, the moon pie, gold and silver coins, whatever. What the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve have done with Germany is to tell Germany, you can't have what's in your safety deposit box. We'll give you a quick peek. Oop, there's the lid. And Germany says it doesn't look exactly like what I put in there, and the New York Federal Reserve says it doesn't really matter. Just trust us, trust us, trust us. A lot of people still wondering if there is or is not any gold located in Fort Knox, and there was an interesting article that just went up reminding us all about how technically when Roosevelt confiscated all the gold, he was confiscating it for the U.S. government, not for the private central bank. And so basically that gold should be stored at the Treasury Building in Washington, D.C. And Fort Knox was apparently built as a secondary facility following Roosevelt's gold confiscation. But technically, that gold is supposed to be the property of the U.S. government, hence the property of you. And the way the Federal Reserve got bailed out is the U.S. Treasury issued a gold certificate for that entire amount and gave it to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve carries that on their books as if it was real gold. It is a Gordian knot mess of these weird certificates and all of this back channel bearer bonds, and it's all designed to impose a system of strict financial control on ordinary citizens, but to allow nations and the powerful the ability to evade that system at will. Something to keep in mind. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Jim Willie is over there saying that the petrodollar has died. Now, for the last 40 years, ever since the Nixon shock, the petrodollar has maintained the U.S. dollar as the global currency reserve and allowed the U.S. to exercise tight control over geopolitical power. Now, starting at 2016, with that huge price decline, the link between crude oil and the U.S. dollar has been broken. And other countries are starting to use other currencies to trade for the oil. And that's why the U.S. government is in a panic to get this war really cranked up and going, because that forcing of the rest of the world to use the U.S. dollar is the only thing holding our economy up. Now then, as oil prices continue to drop, the U.S. shale oil industry is in serious trouble. They can't finance their debt, and the continuing decline in oil prices is pushing the shale oil industry closer toward bankruptcy. The other factor being that they've never been able to deliver the volume of product they originally said they would. It's just not down there. They can't get it out. Now, over at Sears, they're going into what's called the death spiral, and apparently vendors are halting shipments of products to Sears over the cost of default insurance. Now, let me show you how this works. In the good old days, before we were all forced to use debt to do everything in our life, you would have somebody who had a store, and he would have products in the store, and he would sell the products, take that money in, take his profit, and use the rest of it to buy more products for the store. Cash and carry. That's the way it's working. These days, all merchandise into the store is provided on a line of credit. And recently, Sears and many other retailers have hit a problem where vendors aren't sure they're getting paid. They're not seeing the payments come through in those lines of credits, and they're worried. So there's a new type of financial derivative called a default insurance, meaning I'm going to send 5,000 washing machines to Sears, for which they owe me blah, blah, blah in dollars, but I'm worried that they might default on that, so I'm going to buy some default insurance. So if Sears defaults, I still get my money back. So it's another derivative. Unfortunately, as Sears itself edges closer to bankruptcy, the premiums on the derivative default insurance are going up. And so because of that, a lot of vendors are just saying, we can't afford to send you product anymore. Now, this being the end of August, we're already hearing all the talk about we got to crank up that holiday shopping season. We're getting into the autumn. We're almost into September. It's time to start pushing Halloween and Thanksgiving, especially Christmas, Christmas, Christmas. It is amazing how much faith, hope, confidence retailers put on that holiday shopping season. But we don't have any money. And we're not going to be shamed into maxing out our credit cards by TV commercials that imply that if we don't max out our Christmas cards, we somehow don't have that Christmas spirit. It's all a marketing ploy. You want to know what Christmas is really like? You need to experience it in another country. Another article here talking about the percentage of Americans who right now, this is over at Blacklisted News, are literally living paycheck to paycheck. And apparently it's 3/4 of American households are literally living paycheck to paycheck just to make ends meet. So obviously, if you're in those 3/4 houses, you are not going to be going down to the restaurants. You are not going to be going to Sears to buy stuff. The consumer economy is locking up because of a very simple reality. The money junkies have gamed the system so the money flows up to them and none of it comes back down. And unless you have a recycling mechanism where the wealth that is parked at the top of the pyramid is brought back down to allow working and middle-class people to trade their labors and skills for decent wages and salaries in order to pump that money back in to the economy, then the economy is headed for collapse. And that's where we're going right now. It will be another terrible Christmas for the retailers. I mean, they've already got the ornaments up at the Hallmark. And as long as I'm going off on this rant, I have to tell you, I grew up big on Christmas. I grew up in a place where you'd go out and you'd literally cut your own Christmas tree. Didn't have a lot, you know, everybody had huge amounts of land with plenty of trees. And we'd make our own ornaments, And they were always supposed to be about what Christmas is about or what our family's about. And it's kind of weird to go into the Hallmark store and see these ornaments that are figures from movies that have got nothing to do with Christmas, or famous vintage cars or things like that. And I can imagine for certain individuals they might be interested in that. We have a rule on our tree. Everything on it tells a story from our lives. And that includes this ornament that I recovered from the Northridge Meadows apartment after that huge, huge quake that was there. But it seems like there's less and less real Christmas in the Christmas decorations. And maybe that's part of erasing our identity as well. Now, I want to bring up a topic that I've been thinking about a very great deal. And it actually relates to this idea of erasing our history, erasing our culture. It ties into the decline of our economy, the decline of our infrastructure. And it's almost like somebody is out there trying to trash the United States as a whole. To see it worn down, dragged down, dirty, broken, cracked, rotted, in chaos. Why would anybody want to do that? Well, maybe so that Americans wouldn't think it was that important to hang on to anymore. It's like some kid's got a car, and for whatever reason his parents have told him he's got to sell the car. So he goes on out and he scratches up the paint and he cuts some holes in the upholstery and some other survivable damage to trash the car to make it look less attractive so that he will not, in fact, find a buyer who wants it. Or on the opposite side of it, somebody's very fond of this old shirt, don't want to let it go, and so their significant other makes a point of having an accident in the laundry. Whoopsie! Well, time to throw it away now. When you look at the sum total of all that is going on in this country today, with the refugees pouring on in, the attack on our history, they're trying to get us confused about what bathroom we're supposed to be using. It almost seems like somebody is deliberately trashing and destroying the United States of America so that the American people just won't be all that eager to hang on to it when somebody tries to throw it away. I think that's worth thinking about over the weekend. I think there's an idea in there that needs to be explored. Okay, getting on back to speaking of refugees, apparently armed Libyan militia are halting refugee boat departures to Europe. Tripoli has reportedly been halting refugee boats from setting out across the Mediterranean, leading to a rapid drop in the risky sea voyage over the past month. And this revelation sheds a new light into the sudden decline in the number of asylum seekers arriving in Italy. And apparently it fell by more than 50% in July compared to the same period last year. So that is starting to slow down. Now, over in Venice, Italy, the mayor has come on out and said that anyone who shouts Allahu Akbar in his city will be shot. The police are told anybody gets out there, Aloha, snack bar, whatever it is, boom, they're gone. A little extreme, but I can understand their frustrations that they're dealing with. Italy's a very beautiful place. And it is starting to suffer under this huge onslaught of refugees that are coming on in. Meanwhile, over in Santa Rosa, the police department released an illegal alien from custody, who then 2 weeks later murdered his girlfriend. It's another reason this open borders agenda isn't really doing all that well. Now, over in France, this is getting kind of weird. We're starting to see the European Union start to talk and act and behave a lot like old Europe. The French President Macron is ordering the European Union to support his reforms or crumble. So now we're talking about a Frexit. Meanwhile, according to an article that came out of the Express in Great Britain, Macron wants to replicate Merkel and rule the European Union. Remember, we've been hearing Angela Merkel say that Germany should really be ruling the EU because they're stronger. And now, of course, we have this idea where Macron wants the same. So we've got France and Britain are already making stink face at each other. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. Yeah, I have a quick comment. Yesterday, a man called, and he was blaming JFK for the PT-109 incident in the Pacific. I kind of agree with him a little bit, because didn't those PT-109 boats have sonar or some type of radar?
No. There was, early on that particular model PT boat, there was an experiment putting a radar on them, but the PT boats, for the most part, were daytime attackers. They weren't set up to run night operations, and I got a very detailed email from somebody saying that they'd taken the radars out because they were simply too heavy for that small of a hull.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, and let's see. All righty, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Getting on back here. PC insanity. Here's a good one. There was a newsletter posted on the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs campus, and basically it is saying that military veterans should be banned from all four-year universities. And the rationale is because veterans are part of the military culture that is favored by the white supremacist groups. So now we've gone from banning symbols of the Confederacy to attacking everybody who supported Donald Trump as a white supremacist, and then saying we should not allow military veterans to go to college because they're somehow encouraging or enabling the white supremacist groups. That's how convoluted it's getting. Now, one of the things that people who enlist in the military look forward to if they come home with all their bodily parts is the VA benefits, one of which is assistance with your education. And that's a sweet part of the deal. We have a family member who enlisted in one of the armed forces, and they paid for this family member's medical education. So it's a great deal. And so now you have these snowflakes out there who are saying that military veterans should be banned from four-year colleges because they're too close to that white supremacist, military, disciplined culture. I think it's a little bit out there here. And I think people are finally realizing college isn't what it was when we were younger. And apparently enrollment in college all across the country is dropping, all across the board. Young Americans are not buying the college lie. They are seeing the current generation of millennials who are trapped in very difficult to pay student loan debt, and they did not get a high-paying job with that degree, whatever it was that they got. And so they're saying, I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to fall for that one bit. Okay. Back to the phones. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hi. I don't understand how it is that we're setting up radar installations in Oceania. Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia.
Well, one of the reasons, looking at the map, you know, this idea that this radar is supposed to keep watch on North Korea isn't really passing the smell test. And I think what it is this radar system is being used to sort of close gaps in the military radar coverage for the entire ocean. It's like when they were putting all these missiles into Europe and saying, well, they're there to defend against Iran, but they were obviously much closer to Russia. So I think that's the real purpose of that radar. There are limits to what space-based radar can do, and obviously a ground-based radar is a lot more secure and safe than those ocean platform radars.
Yeah, more comprehensive coverage. Immer hoher, immer weiter, Mike, right? Also, you mentioned Christmas. You know, there's nothing quite like Christmas time in Paris. Yeah, the lights of the Eiffel Tower towering above the city, the sound of the call to prayer echoing from multiple minarets all throughout the city throughout the day. The sights and sounds of trucks crashing into busy shopping crowds. It's really something to behold.
Yeah, it's not the Christmases that I remember. We have to let you go, Glenn. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to go right back to the telephones. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I just heard the PT 109 call. I remember I called in about that yesterday. There's a couple of things wrong with that. PT boats almost exclusively operated at night. The reason why was the Japanese did not have radar. They were 2 years behind us. In August of 43, we had radar even in airplanes. And by the way, a couple of the PT 109 squadron mates, which went out on that same mission, a couple of them did have radar. They were sets fitted. He did not have them, but they were fitted. So the Japanese did not have radar. He did not have radar. So the whole silhouette thing about destroyers being, of course, 20 times larger and much higher and all that, they couldn't operate, PT boats couldn't operate in the daylight because of aircraft, and if they ran into a destroyer in the daylight, they'd be outranged by 5-inch guns, by, everything else. So
okay, that makes sense.
But they were almost, even in the Mediterranean, Mike, they only operated at night. And what Kennedy was there doing in August of 43 in the Blanket Straits was the Japanese were running barges at night. They were doing it at night because they couldn't operate in the daytime themselves. I mean, against our air power.
Yeah.
So, and they were trying to interdict the barge and destroyer traffic that was supplying all the the northern Solomon Islands. And that was it.
Okay, well, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. In any event, what came out of that argument was the original caller about PT-109 was that the only reason Kennedy was made a hero out of that was because of his family political connections, and that he was very culpable for the collision. But again, we're dealing with two completely different circumstances. In the case of Kennedy and PT-109, it was a war zone, and there aren't a lot of rules out there. And that stands in stark contrast with what you have with the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain, which are operating in civilian commercial waters, supposedly following the international rules of right-of-way. Everybody's got their nav lights on, everybody wants to be seen, and still somehow these collisions happened. Okay, I guess we lost Peter. All righty, getting on back here. Now, the agenda to get us all gender fluid, if you will, is moving forward, and apparently transgender characters are now being placed in TV shows to indoctrinate the public to the normalcy of trans children. And basically Hollywood is going along with this liberal agenda, and I think it might just backflash on them, because people aren't going to watch a show that they find to be uncomfortable. You can't shame somebody into watching a program that goes against their inherent values. And I'm not here to say what's right or wrong, but it is very obvious this agenda is being forced on us. And again, I am still seeing this as an attempt to get us completely confused about who we really are, to make it easier to control us. But one of the things that struck me as really tragic is how Sesame Street has now added an autistic character to say this is the new normal. It's normal for so many kids to be autistic. Didn't used to be. Did not used to be. But the pharmaceutical companies come up with product. They sell the product causes harm, and media tries to make it look like that harm is just part of normal life. I don't think so. Now, interestingly enough, this is over at Zero Hedge. There's a new climate study that has thrown a big monkey wrench in the global warming debate. And it was basically a new survey of climate change and it located several areas of rapid warming that existed before industrialization and human activity. So again, we have this issue where the actual science doesn't bear out Al Gore's claims. Now, here's an article over in the Daily Mail saying it's now proven the sun has no influence on the current global temperature increase. And here's what's really interesting. The gist of the article is scientists have been studying fluctuations in the sun's activity over the last few decades, and surprise, surprise, the brightness of the sun has decreased, which we know. We're going into a new modern minimum. Then this article goes on to say, since we know the Earth is warming, then obviously this proves the sun has nothing to do with it. They're getting kind of desperate out there. Over at Dellingpole, they have an analysis of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Sequel. And while this is coming from meteorologist Roy Spencer, and he's written a book about the movie. And he celebrates the fact that this is less like a PowerPoint presentation like the first one, and more like a family trip down memory lane. But on checking all of the proffered facts, they're all untrue. Remember the first Al Gore mockumentary? There was actually a lawsuit in Great Britain. For Al Gore's film to be shown to any classroom, it must be preceded by a reading of a statement that says, these 11 points Al Gore makes are shown not to be true. Meanwhile, up in Minnesota, they're into freezing weather here in August. Overnight temperatures in northern Minnesota dropped down to 29 degrees, according to data collected through Thursday by the National Weather Service in Duluth. So here we are, August, and the freezing weather is already starting up north. Let's talk about computers and malware. A lot of stuff going on there. Do you remember back when Macintosh was doing this big ad campaign about how they were safe from malware, they were safe from infections, and it was a little bit misleading because what was going on back then was that Mac sales were a very tiny fraction of what PC sales were. So the hackers would go for the PCs. It's a target-rich opportunity. More opportunities to make money, to steal identities and so forth. But Macintosh, Apple, tried to imply there was something naturally robust about the Macs where they didn't get infected. And that was simply not true. And it is not true today. Apparently, Macintosh malware is the highest it's ever been after a 230% increase in attacks over the last 12 months. There are enough Macintoshes out there where it's making it worthwhile for the hackers and cyber criminals to go after those devices. Okay. I'm hearing a line. Okay, we have a caller on the line. Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, talking about autism, I'm a cab driver, and in this day and age, there's no cash in the economy. The majority of our business now is medical and school transportation. Right now, a lot of the people that do school runs are getting their cars inspected by the state patrol and getting stickers. And you wouldn't believe it unless you did this job, not only how many halfway houses, shelters, women's things, but there are schools, elementary and junior high schools inside of hospitals and mental hospitals. And, so you get these cab rides to kids on charge accounts, and they don't go to normal schools anymore. And there's these autism centers, and there'd be like 30 medical vans dropping kids off in the morning. Like, something's gone wrong.
Yes, it has. Profits above people. But,
but that's what we do. It isn't like people are calling and spending their own money to do anything anymore. You might get a ride to the airport early in the morning, but by about 5 o'clock, most of the rides are, dialysis, counseling, people going for methadone. That's the business now. It isn't taking mom to the grocery store or or liquor store round trip. And but if you didn't do this job, you wouldn't believe. And here's what they do: they find a one-level house with about 4 or 5 bedrooms out in the suburbs somewhere.
Yeah.
And some medical outfit buys it and puts like 4 or 5 disabled peoples in there, and they've got like, nurses' aides running it. And I mean, you just can't believe it. Okay. Hey, I have a question. You remember back in the 1800s when they like hydraulic the fields in California for the gold?
Oh, yeah.
They had to stop. Where did they get the power to get the water to go up into the hills there?
Mostly it was gravity fed. They would run pipes up to the lakes at the very top of the mountain chain, and the water would just roar on down those pipes and tunnels, and it would come out of these giant hoses called monitors, and they just blast open the hillside. And it was finally stopped because of just how much damage and destruction it was doing to everything around it. And if you go up into the San Gabriel Mountains today, especially down around East Fork, you can still see those scars up on the side of those canyon walls. In fact, there was one very famous blunder where a mining company had literally tunneled through a mountain to bring water from the other side at a lake, and somebody got off the plumb line because the tunnel actually sloped up rather than down, and so they couldn't get any water to come through it, and they went out of business. And that tunnel is still there, too.
Wow. Okay, have a good weekend. See you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Yeah, I love the history of Southern California. I always used to go out wandering through the Mojave and everything. A lot of interesting things to see. I do like history because I have seen so much of it myself at my age. All right, getting on back to computers. The opening round of negotiations for NAFTA, which is being held in secrecy, is about to get underway. And digital rights groups are very concerned over the intellectual property right provisions of NAFTA, figuring it could be another Trans-Pacific partnership in terms of highly restrictive rules regarding intellectual property, and especially getting into the area of fair use. Now, originally, copyright, and for that matter, patent, was designed to allow the creator of a work or an invention to make a reasonable profit off of their creation, after which it would become part of the general wealth of the public domain. And over time, the corporations, in fact, Disney was really big on this, because the copyright on Mickey Mouse was about to come on up. And they went into the courts and said, look, we can't have this character going anywhere else. It's our corporate property. So the laws started changing to get more and more restrictive to protect the corporate interest. Now, in terms of the fair use doctrine, obviously a lot of the independent media rely on the fair use doctrine to be able to quote from other sources in order to comment. And more we are seeing the corporate media trying to take the position that you're not allowed to quote from our articles, no matter how limited it is. The current fair use doctrine is you cannot copy somebody's entire work, and you shouldn't anyway, but you can excerpt it in order to do a comment. Like if this article is talking about how Osama bin Laden brought down the World Trade Towers, you can copy that part, attribute it, saying over at Fox News they said this, and then you come back with your counter argument. And that is considered a legitimate use of other people's copyrighted materials. Fair use. And the corporate media would like that to go away as another vector of the attack on the independent media. So people are just very concerned about secret meetings and secret negotiations. It's never very, very good. All right, a couple of medical stories here as we head up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. It's been announced recently that there's been a breakthrough for a much safer Zika vaccine. And the problem is, in making that announcement, they have vindicated the people who said that the original vaccine was toxic and dangerous. And that's how Big Pharma will operate. They put out a medication, people say, it's harmful, it's dangerous. Oh, don't be ridiculous, don't be ridiculous. And then just down the road, they'll come on back in and say, well, we have a new improved one that gets rid of those problems. So now you're admitting the problems? Well, yeah, because that older thing is off the market. And sometimes it can just be about money, and sometimes it can cause harm. Now, over in France, one of their most commonly prescribed drugs, levothyrox, which is a thyroid stimulant, is very, very popular. But recently the pharmaceutical company made a change in the formula where they got rid of basically a milk protein and replaced it with a couple of others. And all of a sudden, patients are complaining of all kinds of serious side effects. And the pharmaceutical company is now getting defensive. And again, we're off and running. The business model seems to be make a product, sell it, make a lot of money. If there are lawsuits, the cost of the lawsuits is cost of doing business. And you will make more money selling the product than you'll lose in the lawsuits, so it's a good way to go. Profits above people. And we're seeing it all over the place. We really, really are. Okay, getting on down here. Let's see. Apparently the Thomas Jefferson statue at the University of Virginia has been defaced. Oh, man, that's terrible. It really is an attack on our history. And again, let me make a point. We have all these people running around here screaming about the evils of slavery who have never really been a slave. And they want to judge all of our historical figures based on life as it is here and now today. And that's a little bit arrogant. We shouldn't be judging Thomas Jefferson and George Washington on their behavior until we understand the times they lived in and how back then it was considered socially acceptable. We don't have a right to judge people in other times based on how we live here and now. Just like we really don't have a right to judge people in other countries based on how we live here and now. That's the ultimate in arrogance, to go on out and say, we, the United States of America, have that right to chastise people who live differently under different circumstances, different laws, different times, different places, which is really what it comes down to. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at this breaking story. Apparently, 2 police officers outside Buckingham Palace were attacked by a man with a knife. The man has been arrested. And all of a sudden, I'm noticing there seem to be a lot of these knife attacks. Now, we know the gun grabbers are after the guns. We also know that some places, such as Great Britain, already restrict the kind of knives you are allowed to carry and own. And it may seem like it's an absurd suggestion, but I'm almost wondering if we're starting to see the beginning of a propaganda campaign to demonize any kind of substantial knife. That all you need is a little plastic knife to eat your dinner with, and anything more than that, you must be a terrorist or a white supremacist or whatever they're going to call you. But it is alarming that even as the attempt to ban guns falters, there seems to be all of a sudden all these knife attacks are taking place here, along with the white vans that are going on in as well here. Okay, now getting on down here, let's see. A lot of people are coming on out about that Fort Knox gold that's there. Okay. Yeah, another story over at Investment Watch blog. Fake news media drops phony Russia collusion story and starts on Trump mental illness narrative. They're just going to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And notice there's never an acknowledgement of all these earlier stories that went nowhere. The dossier of Trump and the prostitutes. Russia hacked the DNC servers. Russia hacked the election. Trump and Russia are now in collusion. Trump is a racist. Now he's mentally retarded. And they just keep piling on like that. And I imagine it must be counterproductive because everybody's watching this saying, it's more of the same. It's more of the same. And again, I'm getting this very sick feeling that we're not really going to see anything get done because we have our second Attorney General in a row, our second FBI Director in a row, who are simply ignoring that rotted, corrupt core inside the U.S. government power structure. And I think it's because fully exposed, everything that the Bushes, the Clintons, and the CIA did would definitely be the end of public trust in the U.S. government, which I think is coming anyway, no matter what they do. I still maintain that this country is headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and we need to be prepared for it. Just like those poor people down in Texas need to be prepared for that hurricane. So we're going to come up here on our station identification. We're going to take a short break. When we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be here. And we'll be talking about a lot of the stuff that's going on over in her view of the world here. Apparently, Charles Barkley was labeled a white supremacist for telling black people to stop killing each other. Sounds about right. All right, we'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here at hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting to the side of me is the lovely Lady Claire with her unique perspective on the world. And what is the first thing you want to talk about?
First thing I want to talk about, and this is getting no coverage in the United States press that I've been able to see. And the title, and it comes to us from Zero Hedge, is Rome is Burning, this time by its refugees. Police in Rome evicted hundreds of refugees that had occupied the Piazza Indipendenza, 1 block from the country's main train station. Apparently the squatters were so defiant that local police used water cannons and batons in the forceful eviction. Some 100 refugees had occupied Piazza Indipendenza since Saturday, when most of about 800 squatters were evicted from an adjacent office building, which they had occupied for 5 years, amazingly.
Yes.
Hung on the building was a sheet with writing reading, "We are refugees, not terrorists," in Italian. A small fire burned on the pavement, and a sheet hanging from the first-floor window was set alight by squatters inside. Most of these squatters, interestingly enough, were Eritreans who had been granted Italian asylum. Police said that they had refused to accept lodgings offered by the city. Now, more than 600,000 boat migrants have arrived in Italy from North Africa since 2014, and it's just been too much for the Italian government, military, and for the people who who have lived there and are actually Italian nationals.
Well, when you have a country, your population and your infrastructure are supposed to be growing together.
Yes.
And when you have a sudden surge of population that the infrastructure is not designed to be able to deal with, it's going to cause stress. It's going to cause failures in some of the social systems. And again, it's almost like they're trying to turn Europe back into what it was just before the Great Plagues, overcrowded, dirty, poor health conditions.
Yeah, and then we have to look a little bit closer to home on this next one. Los Angeles' response to homeless encampments isn't working, Councilman says. And apparently there has been an outcry from residents and business owners and wants to take a hard look at the way the city responds to the increasing presence of encampments and recreational vehicles. And, stating the obvious, Councilman Mitchell Englander said, "What we've done isn't working." And in recent months, it's interesting the change in perception, Michael, this caused. The issue of hopelessness and homelessness have become inescapable, with residents encountering more homelessness in their neighborhoods. According to the councilman who represents Northwest San Fernando Valley, and you and I both know, exactly where that is, used to be an affluent jewel of greater Southern California, but no more. And he goes on to say, there is not a conversation I have, whether it's fixing a street, trimming a tree, walking to school, or going to a grocery store, where we don't talk about the issue. And Los Angeles City Councilman Joe Buscierno's office said the same. Also, Bramanir Kutavarek. And Kutavarek said, we're very conscious of it. It's a battle every day. And this worries me not only for the poor people who are out there on the streets. I mean, Mike, no one wakes up one morning and says, I want to lose my job, I want to lose my livelihood, I want to lose my ability to feed myself, and I'm going to become homeless. That doesn't happen.
No, it does, but when it does, most people, because of a sense of shame, they're going to be finding places to stay where they're not visible. And so for a long time, the homeless problem can appear to be remote or abstract. But all of a sudden, you have so many homeless that are out there, and we've got 8,000 on this island, and this is a tiny island. There simply aren't enough places where they can live where they're not going to be seen by somebody. And especially along the bike path that goes along the center lock here in Pearl Harbor. I mean, it's just homeless camp after homeless camp after homeless camp after homeless camp.
And I sort of wish that our Angelino representatives would take a trip to Salt Lake City, because they have made incredible strides, Mike, in taking care of the homeless. Somebody in there crunched the numbers and had the horse sense to reveal that it was a lot more expensive having them go to ER, having them get arrested, et cetera, than putting them in low-cost housing, pairing them up with a social worker, and see what would be something that they could actually do for a living. And so that seems to be working. And one of the things I encourage my American brothers and sisters to consider is what has worked. This program has worked. I'm sure that the people at Salt Lake City would be eager and ready to talk to the Angelinos about their problems and see if they could help them out conceptually. And I have to state on this, I am no bleeding heart, and I was very lucky to have come from a family with true work ethics, and have learned to make what I'm good at into a profession. But not everyone has that flexibility. If you've got a job that is primarily mechanical in nature, and that job goes away to a place where labor is far cheaper and mechanism is going to do the most with the problems, you're in difficulty if, that particular job or company goes away.
Well, yes, we need to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And there's another aspect here, and this gets back to what I was saying the other day about Child Protective Services, where because of the way their funding operates, there's an incentive for them to find more children that need to be removed from their homes. That's also a mechanism that we see working with homeless services, where those people who are making money handling homeless programs, if the homeless problem goes away, their job goes away. And that's going to be a big reason why solutions like they implemented Salt Lake City is not going to be brought to here, because it's literally a homelessness industrial complex that is going to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, and it's really tragic wherever and whenever it happens. And I looked at the next article and I said, are you absolutely kidding me? There's a newsletter from UCCS, veterans should be banned from 4-year universities. Now, the university explained that while this group is not affiliated with the college, they say it's a free speech issue and the group can post what they want. The article goes on to say veterans should be banned from UCCS and other 4-year colleges. It also generalizes veterans and say that they are unsympathetic to the LGBTQ community. The article says all veterans have right-wing ideologies.
Well, let's be general about this. And I did touch on this real quick about the attempt to link military veterans with white supremacists until you realize, our military veterans are encompassing all races, religions.
Rainbow. Yeah,
they're a rainbow.
Yeah.
And all orientations. Okay, and so it's really very ridiculous. And again, where they're out there saying we have a free speech right to come on into your campus and post this thing. Actually, no, you don't. The First Amendment says you can speak publicly about what your issue is. You're not allowed to go into somebody's living room and force them to listen to you. You're not allowed to come into my website and post stuff that I know to be nonsense. And you're not allowed to go on a college campus that you are not actually enrolled at or affiliated with and put up nonsense like this. And again, with the right to say what you want to say comes the responsibility that you consider carefully what you're going to say before you open your mouth here. Because the First Amendment is not a right to look like an idiot.
Yes. And I was looking at this, I almost did a double Picard facepalm upon reading this. This is one of the most ill-conceived, misconceived concepts in a long history of misconceived concepts. To deny an education to veterans because of some assessment created by magical thinking they are all right-wingers, so they don't have a right to education at that school? I mean, I have to ask, where is the logic here? Has anyone actually come up with a standards and means test to determine what former military think to make that determination? And please, aren't we all Americans, even if we think differently about political issues? And that, to me, Mike, coupled with the First Amendment restrictions and educational restrictions someone at the school or may have attended the school want to force on their community. It's so wrong. So absolutely wrong.
Somebody put out a cartoon I saw the other day where there's this giant conveyor belt, and in the middle there's a little building with two doors that says college. And on the conveyor belt approaching the college are all these high schoolers saying, I want to be a chemical engineer. I want to be an artist. I want to do this and that. And coming out of the college, it's all, down with America and we hate white people. And I'm not surprised college enrollments are dropping.
Yeah.
Because you're not really getting an education. You're being indoctrinated to somebody's political agenda. And they want you to go into debt for the rest of your life for the privilege.
Yeah. Let's talk about NAFTA, which is being intensely negotiated, and I might add, behind closed doors these days. We have no idea what the working text is looking like in terms of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Back in the early 1990s, NAFTA was one of the hottest political issues in the country. When he was running for president in 1992, Bill Clinton promised that NAFTA would result in an increase in the number of high-quality jobs for Americans and would reduce illegal immigration. Ross Perot warned that just the opposite would happen. He warned that if NAFTA was implemented, there would be a giant sucking sound as thousands of businesses and millions of jobs left this country. Well, most Americans chose to believe Bill Clinton. 20 years later, and it turns out that Perot was right and Clinton was dead wrong. But it appears, Mike, that history is repeating itself, and most Americans don't even have a clue as to what is happening. As you will read in this article, Barack Obama had been negotiating a secret trade deal that has been called NAFTA on steroids. And if Congress adopts it, we could lose millions more good-paying jobs. Now, any trade deal which does not make better the situation of American workers makes them worse. And we have in this country a lot of people who've lost their jobs through outsourcing, offshoring. And any trade union deals which do not make better the situation of American workers in the U.S. makes them worse, and consequently shouldn't be ratified by the U.S. Senate. However, I think we all know what's going to happen. Corporations who support these alleged congressional representatives will become the congressional whisperers and ensure that trade deals which compromise the American public financially will ultimately be ratified, because those deals support their corporations, no matter how horrific they may be for we the people.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah. We're living under corporatocracy, which Benito Mussolini said was fascism. You know what's really interesting, though? There's a movie called Rollerball. There's actually two of them that are out there. The second one's a waste of time. The first one, which starred James Caan as Jonathan E., had an interesting backstory about how the world was being ruled by corporations, that the civil government was vestigial at best, the corporate boards were really calling the shots and directed all of life on Earth, including the wars.
Yep.
And it does seem like we're actually getting to that sort of a phase where giant corporations hold more power than civil governments.
Yeah, and that's really scary, because that means they dictate foreign and domestic policies.
Yes.
Yeah. Going over to Ukraine, a couple of interesting developments, one of which I'll talk about now and one of which I'll talk about later. Apparently, the U.S. military biolabs in Ukraine are producing bioweapons and disease-causing agents.
Ooh, swell.
Yeah. And Ukraine has turned into the proving ground for the next generation of U.S. biological mass weapons. In 2015, American alternative media outlet InfoWars accused the Pentagon of developing new types of biological weapons in secret labs in Ukraine. Now, this is hysterical. Maybe not funny, but strange. The facilities were constructed under the terms of the bilateral agreement signed between the Ministry of Health in the Ukraine and the Department of Defense in 2012. And they did it again, in a way to get around European strictures against this kind of collusion. And my response is, how lovely. Why are they not putting energy and effort into curing people rather than killing them? It makes me very nervous about what these people are going to do and against whom they're going to be using these weapons.
Well, all goes back to the Georgia Guidestones, which says the total human population of Earth ought to be limited to 500 million.
Mm-hmm.
You have George Herbert Walker Bush and his off-the-cuff comment about the useless eaters.
Yeah.
And again, from their point of view, they don't want to cure people who are of no use to them.
Mm-hmm.
If this person is ill and can do something we need, yeah, we'll cure them. If this person over here is ill and there isn't anything they can do for us, we pull the plug.
Yeah, yeah, that's about it these days. And I'd like to focus our attention now on a new bill. This is, I believe, out of Pennsylvania, would force arrested protesters to pay police overtime other fees. And yes, I was right. There is a new bill that's being introduced by 7 Pennsylvania Republican state lawmakers, which could force protesters arrested at demonstrations to pay for police overtime and other fees related to their action.
I like that.
Okay.
You disagree with me?
I may beg to differ, and I will share with you why.
Yeah, please do. That's what makes for good radio, good debate.
The bill, SB 754, has been introduced by Representative Scott Martin of Lancaster County. His district has been the site of anti-pipeline protests aimed at the Atlantic Sunrise natural gas pipeline. Under the terms of the bill, a person is responsible for public safety response costs incurred by a state agency or political subdivision as a result of the state agency's or political subdivision's response to a demonstration if, in connection with a demonstration, the person is convicted of a felony or first misdemeanor offense. In other words, they would be on the hook for all the costs, such as police overtime, medical emergency, and other basic services associated with protests. What felony or misdemeanor offenses the protester was convicted of would come with its own independent penalty. And there are people who are going to get caught in this crossfire, Mike, who haven't done a thing bad. They just got, they showed up at the wrong place at the wrong time. And what I think, if this bill is passed and other bills by other state legislatures, we're going to have an horrifically chilling effect on free speech, and we'll also have a very big chilling on peaceful protesters who just want to make their voices known, creating no violence whatsoever, which leads me to believe that this is probably the design intent of the author of this bill.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here, because as you said, if they're demonstrating peacefully, then they can't be arrested.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about people, and yes, there's a potential for abuse and setting people up. I would love to see the bill basically impose these penalties in the event of a felony conviction, but not the misdemeanor. That'll give us a little bit of a buffer zone against abuse. But again, as I've said many, many times, the First Amendment gives you a right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. The First Amendment does not protect you from running down the street with a shield and a club and screaming about, white supremacists and clubbing people and causing violence.
I agree with you on that.
Okay.
I do agree.
So as long as you are protesting peacefully and demonstrating peacefully, the First Amendment protections apply. If you start being violent, you're on your own. And so maybe with some modifications and safety in the light that, yes, it could be abused. But I'm not entirely sure that this is a totally bad thing.
Okay. It very much reminds me of the brilliantly dystopian quote from Orwell's 1984. The past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, and the lie became the truth. To the point where in future history books, there was no First Amendment to the Constitution. There is no redress of any kinds of wrongs that may have been done. But if this kind of behavior is asserted at the state and federal levels, we may well reach a point in this country where the Constitution and Bill of Rights will be thoroughly eviscerated, no longer existing to protect the American people against a government which doesn't serve the people, but only serves the corporations.
Well, you're absolutely right, and we're already
Yeah.
seeing this in Common Core, which is teaching the Bill of Rights to children. They've been rewritten to change the meaning of them, and we're seeing our rights being constantly chipped away, incrementally, leading toward this very dystopian future.
Yeah. And what I'd like to say to all of our readers and listeners right now, folks, if you've got skills and kids, get the doggone heck out of this country. It is morphing into a dictatorship with all the techno bills and whistles to guarantee that you are thoroughly surveilled 24/7, and you won't understand the ramifications of that surveillance, I'm afraid, until it is too late.
All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Lady Claire, take it away.
Okay. This comes from antiwar.com. Big Brother wants warrantless access to your smartphone. Now, follow me with this. Imagine that you're a journalist meeting with a secret government source. Thanks to the information provided by this source, you break an astronomically important story of government fraud or abuse. After the story breaks, the government decides it wants to go back and look at your cell's historical geolocation, information, and metadating, tracking your every move and jeopardizing your source. Well, current Supreme Court precedent and a decision made by the U.S. Sixth Court of Appeals allows government to collect this kind of metadata without a warrant. Now, this is why...
I just got an idea for a new business.
What's that?
We're going to have to move to Washington, D.C. for this.
Okay.
Okay, we have a bunch of young people, and the business is that somebody gives us some money and their cell phone, and we hire a kid to walk the cell phone all over the neighborhood for however many hours while they meet their source.
Okay,
Yes,
that works.
I
That
think
works.
That would work.
That's why a group of 20 media organizations has filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court, urging the justices to turn over the lower court's decision and require law enforcement to obtain a warrant before collecting archived cell phone location data and metadata. The brief is signed by media nonprofits such as Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press and media publishers like First Look Media, publisher of The Intercept, which is something, by the way, I have a great deal of respect for. They have a track record of getting it right, getting the hard evidence, and presenting it intelligently. But I've got to tell you, Mike, I'm about ready to ditch my iPhone for a couple of strings and a tin can.
Actually, it's a couple of tin cans and a
string. Okay, I had it backwards.
I just bought you that iPhone, and already you want to get rid
No. Next, I'd like to go over...
Are you in there eavesdropping on me?
Stop it. We get a report from Ukraine that Sekdef Mathis is actively considering arming Ukraine. And apparently he was there today, and he played up the narrative that ongoing fighting in eastern Ukraine was wholly Russia's fault, vowing that the U.S. stands with Ukraine against the Russians, and confirming active considerations are ongoing in providing lethal military aid to them. Ukraine's President Poroshenko claimed 3,000 Russian troops are in Ukrainian territory, a claim which appears to be built around the assumption that Crimea, which seceded from Ukraine and joined the Russian Federation, is still technically Russian. No. Poroshenko, you need to get the message. Are you not a signatory to the UN? There is something that is absolutely enshrined in that charter, and it's peaceful self-determination, which apparently for him, when it comes to Crimea, not so much. Still, Mattis appeared to accept the number unquestioningly, accusing Russia of trying to redrop the map of Europe, oh that's rich, by military force, and vowing that the U.S. would stand against them. Though he stopped short of promising weapons to Ukraine, he gave the impression that they were probably coming. So, Sekdef Mathis, a word please. These alleged defensive weapons will most probably not be used in this context. Rather, the Ukrainian military will likely use them in an offensive manner against independent pro-Russian bastions in the south and west part of Ukraine. Now, this in turn could wind up creating a war in the region, pitting the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine. And all I have to say is, to Sekdef Mathis right now is, I really hope you've thought this completely through and examined all of the possible scenarios. Because, Mike, what I see here is a big, fat, hairy potential for just a nasty situation to ensue.
That, unfortunately, is the U.S. agenda, a big, fat, nasty situation to return the world to Bretton Woods. We all know a world war is coming. It's just a question of when. And the big bang, everybody's just waiting for a starting time.
And precisely when and where, what's going to be the trigger point? You've got all of this unrest in various countries. You've got the U.S.
Somebody just had a good thing out on the golf course out back here.
Yeah, they were very happy.
Yes.
Because right now, and I'm going to tell you honestly, and to all the military and alphabet soup agencies listening, we don't have the weaponry, we don't have the troop strength, we don't have the manufacturing, and we don't have the money, and we're not on the right side of history in this bit. And as you always say, Mike, Sun Tzu, the great philosopher and swordsman, said that in order to really win, you must be on the right side of history. We're not.
No, we aren't. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Lady Claire, your next story?
Well, the next story gives me absolutely no joy and very much grief. Apparently, children were among the dead in the latest Saudi attack on Yemen civilians. At least 5 children and 14 adults killed in an air raid in a residential neighborhood. Let me say that again. A residential neighborhood of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The second day of mass civilian deaths in the war-torn country. The attack destroyed 2 buildings on Friday, the southern district of Fajatan, leaving people buried under debris. Mohammed Ahmad, who lived in one of the buildings, said he was among the residents who had taken 9 bodies to a hospital. We extracted them one by one from under the rubble, he said. Some of them were children from a single family. And there's also another article intertwined with this saying Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen is a strategic failure. When the rocket hit, one of the buildings was immediately destroyed because the building next door collapsed too. Some residents got out, others were simply trapped. The death toll was feared to rise further as rescuers pull more victims from the rubble. And the Saudi government said, oh, we'll look into it. You know, we're going to evaluate and look into it. And what I cannot get my hands around, because, you know, Mike, I love people. I want to see children grow up, achieve their potential, be happy with their lives. And I have to ask, how completely sanitized is that last statement by the Saudi government, as though the horrific carnage achieved by the strike never happened, as though children were not blown apart from their mother's arms, as though it didn't happen that medically fragile elderly were blown to smithereens. It's like it never happened. And I have to say, right now, the bloodlust of the Saudi government and Royal House of Saud in Yemen knows no boundaries.
Well, it's not just them. They're acting as proxies because of that issue of the Yemen people wanting to take back control of their own country.
And yet President Trump, his cabinet, and the Pentagon are perfectly at home in colluding with these people, enabling these strikes which assassinate the innocent, and that is called a war crime. Now let's get on to some areas of Saudi Arabia where some things may be shifting in a possibly different direction. There was an article from Anti-War that Iran is ready to support Saudi Arabia in improving bilateral ties. Now, this is nothing short of a miracle if you notice how tense and aggressive they have been against each other. I wonder if President Putin of Russia hasn't been the government whisperer for both governments and saying, why don't you guys get along? But the Iranian...
This is a major change for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Iranian foreign minister claimed that his country is willing to support Saudi Arabia's move to improve bilateral relations. Now, this comes to us out of Sputnik. Iran is ready to improve bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia whenever the latter expresses a similar interest, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Thursday. If the Saudi authorities take steps to improve their relationships with us, Iran will certainly respond in a positive manner, Zarif was quoted as saying in the Anadolu, which is the Turkish news agency. The Iranian security is protecting Saudi Arabia's embassy in Tehran, and they did this while a group of demonstrators gathered to protest the execution of Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia. And so apparently the Saudis are asking Iraq, double twist, to help resolve the rivalry with Iran. And the two states are expected to begin the series of diplomatic contacts next month, the news outlet reported. Okay, Mike, if these reports are actually true, and I am reading the tea leaves correctly, should Saudi Arabia deepen its relationship with Tehran, the U.S. will not have its proxy army in Saudi Arabia to fight a war against it.
Good conclusion. The justification for it, though, is right now it's Saudi Arabia and Iraq are going to open the diplomatic discussion, and Iran is telegraphing to Saudi Arabia that they would be interested in coming along as well. And if Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran were all to form a single power bloc in the Middle East, they would pretty much rival Israel. The only place that Israel would have the advantage would be the nuclear weapons and U.S. backing.
And what I thought was the only country, and you are agreeing with me on this, the only country in the region with a leadership which is collectively, let's say, excreting bricks, would be that of Israel.
Yes.
I am most certain to bet that Netanyahu is at this very moment, or his right-hand man at the IDF, developing several false flag scenarios to blame on Iran and or Saudi Arabia with the intention of destroying the fledgling trust and rapprochement between these countries.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That would be Israel's next obvious step.
Yeah. So I'm hoping and praying that next weekend is quiet. I don't know mathematically that I'd bet on it right now, but yeah. Oh, apparently the Senate is very infuriated with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. They want to pass a piece of legislation describing them as a non-state hostile intelligence service. And in the language of the bill, it reads, "It is the sense of Congress that WikiLeaks and the senior leadership of WikiLeaks resemble a non-state hostile intelligence service, often abetted by state actors, and should be treated as such." A section of the act reads. Now, the act was almost unanimously passed with a Senate panel for last month, 14-1, rejected by only one guy, Senate Ron Wyden. And Senator Wyden, you have my attaperson for today. You are a Democrat from Oregon who staunchly opposed the measure due to the provisions that was stuck in about WikiLeaks.
Well, here's what's going on here. This is a continuation of this idea of erasing the idea of a whistleblower entity, and instead recategorize everybody who's a whistleblower or a truth teller as somehow being in service to a foreign government. Remember when they were out there screaming that we were an arm of Russian propaganda? I forget which camera we're using.
Okay.
This is more the same thing. WikiLeaks is a whistleblowing organization. This bill seeks to redefine them as a hostile intelligence service abutted by foreign governments. In other words, Russia's behind WikiLeaks now. That'll be the next thing that we hear.
Oh, yeah. And apparently, Attorney General Jeff Sessions previously said in April that the arrest of WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange was a priority for the DOJ. Oh, really, Attorney General? How about all the blankety-blank hacker attacks that have destroyed businesses, that have put people in terrible situations? Aren't you equipped to maybe take a look at this if you are really the Department of Justice, or does this not matter? What it's done to American businesses.
Or, again, your predecessor, the former head of the FBI, James Comey, went down a laundry list of felony Title 18 violations committed by Hillary Clinton. Why are you not going after Hillary Clinton? Your predecessor very obviously sold out. Have you sold out, Mr. Sessions?
Yeah, one has to wonder. And to the best of my understanding, Mike, this guy has an enviable track record for getting the truth out there and consistently. I find that commendable. But unfortunately with Mr. Sessions, he and his buds in the Senate want him arrested because he has embarrassed the American government by telling American citizens and the world the truth about you and what you do.
I helped a little.
Oh, I know you did. I know you did. And, this is interesting. A D.C. judge has approved government warrant for data from anti-Trump website, but there's a catch. The Justice Department last week proposed amending the scope of its warrant to exclude the IP addresses of website visitors and limit the search only to records from July 1st, 2016 to the January 20th inaugural. Now, the website DreamHost said that the warrant was still too broad, as it could sweep in people who sent emails to disrupt J20 addresses. The company objected to the two-step process that would require it to turn over data in bulk and let prosecutors search for and seize evidence of criminal investigation in these
Criminal
riots.
involvement in the
Yeah.
riots.
And Morin said at a hearing yesterday that he recognized the tension between free speech rights and law enforcement's needs to search digital records for evidence. He said he added safeguards to his order granting the government's request for information in an effort to balance those two concerns. Balance, my astrolabe. I'm sorry. Sir, the gloves are off here. Morin knows that the drill in D.C. is, as what you say so famously many times, plata o plomo, lead or silver. And little background, this is how this gets defined in the bowels of D.C. is as you help me out of the scrape and you will be rewarded. But if you do not, please accept the reality that we may terminate you with extreme prejudice.
Well, they very rarely have to get that way.
Yeah.
Trading the dark favors is the coin of the realm.
And Morin, to no great shock, was a Clinton appointee, so he may be better acquainted with where the bodies are buried than some other of his colleagues. Now, he was appointed judge in 1996 by President Clinton and previously served as presiding judge of the court's criminal system, where he helped oversee management of calendars for judges who handled criminal cases. Not against Hillary Clinton, I bet.
Nope.
He also has worked representing death penalty clients at the Southern Center for Human Rights in Atlanta with the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. Now, Mike, I just have to wonder, I've got one of those kinds of minds, if instead of ratcheting down the parameters of his investigation so severely, or perhaps he was ordered to do it, what would he have found that would have led to the connections with some very powerful people who have utterly no sense of fair play or morality? And that, Mike, is why this guy has the case, to tighten the screws and button down any attempt to really find where the money went or implicate any of the DNC in his investigation of these protests. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does make sense because, again, if you're talking about violent protesters at the inauguration, they're no longer protected by freedom of speech. And but again, there is this dark, rotted core of corruption inside our government, and everybody is protecting it, not because they love it, but because they understand if that particular festering boil pops, it's the end of the U.S. government's credibility.
Yeah. Going back to the U.S. government's credibility, Congress has quietly passed a bill allowing warrantless searches of home. Only 1% opposed it. The proposal was for a safety commission to act as a wing of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, which may sound logical when its power includes things such as the ability to adopt, revise, and distribute a written state safety oversight program, whatever the darned heck that means, and to review, approve, oversee, and enforce the adoption and implementation of WMATA's Public Transportation Safety Plan. There is, however, one big, major, hairy, fat red flag buried within the text of the bill, which stems from the list of powers given to the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission, and it violates one of the basic tenets of the U.S. Constitution. And this is, to me, this is absolutely a suspicious, and it appears to be, and I hope that if this bill does get passed into law, it will be repealed in a Supreme Court case.
Well, basically, in a nutshell, they're granting themselves the authority to, if you live near one of these transit lines, they are granting themselves the authority to come on in and do a safety inspection on your property. And I think probably most people would be willing to let that happen anyway. But the reason they want to grant that authority and not require a warrant is to basically speed things along. It does open up the possibility, even though this inspection is not a search relative to an arrest or a prosecution, there is still going to be incentives where if these inspectors see something in your home, they'll be incentivized to report it on in, just like we're hearing that post office delivery people are now being trained on how to spot certain things in your mail delivery and report you out for that.
Spooks.
Yes.
Spook Central. Spooks are us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The next story I thought might be kind of interesting for our readers and listeners. Guess what, folks? You, the U.S. taxpayers, spent $50 million, that's million with an M, for luxury cars, gun, and booze to mentor Afghan intelligence officers. Oh, man, talking about from the department if they can really screw this up. Apparently, that was a foreign firm hired by the U.S. government to mentor and train Afghan intelligence officers. And they billed Uncle Sam for more than $50 million in, get this, drumroll please. Thank you. Luxury cars including Porsches, an Aston Martin, and a Bentley, and the lucrative salaries of executives and their spouse who didn't do any work. The firm also spent $1,500 on alcohol, isn't this supposed to be a Muslim country? And $42,000 on automatic weapons prohibited under the terms of the contract according to figures provided by a U.S. senator from a federal audit that has not been released to the public. And Mike, I got to tell you, looking at the numbers, which are staggering, when we have homeless vets sleeping rough on our streets, I would be almost willing to bet that this report is never going to see the light of day.
Well, I notice how gently they tiptoe around the identity of this third-party foreign country.
Mm-hmm. Yep, right. And it really, I have to wonder what that company was, and I would like to find out some more about it. I think I'm going to do some research before I come on the next show and see if I can find out who these people were and how in the world they got the contract. I mean, looking at us going back into Afghanistan, we have done the surges before. They failed, okay? This apparently is all about the oil pipeline still controlling them, the mineral rights, and, of course, keeping the opium poppy trade going at whatever cost necessary, no matter how many Americans die in these processes. And that makes me angry, Mike.
Well, it makes me angry, too, but I think there's another agenda mixed in with the others, and that is that they're trying to build momentum toward the completion of this grand design of conquering the resource-rich areas of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, anything that could be looking like a defeat will derail the entire project. And that's why, even though they were talking about getting out of Syria, cruise missiles, Moab bomb. They were talking about quitting Afghanistan after 16 years. No, we have to go back on in there. And I think the idea is it doesn't matter how much money they spend or how many people's children have to be killed and crippled. They're just going to keep that war going forever and just keep saying, well, we didn't lose this one. We're still in there. Unfortunately, we didn't lose it. And again, looking at the sheer volume of the number of countries, the number of military forces engaged. It's a world war. I'm sorry, it is. And maybe we're not going to get a big bang like a Lusitania or a Pearl Harbor. Or maybe 9/11 really was supposed to be it, that galvanizing event that launched us on this path to war. Okay, we're coming up here on our final commercial break of the day, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday program, and we are just now getting word that the DNC fraud lawsuit has now been dismissed by Judge Zlock. Zlock simply said that the plaintiffs had failed to prove that there was bias in the DNC towards Hillary Clinton and away from Bernie Sanders. So it can truly be said that justice is, in fact, blind. All right, let's hand this back over to you. And what is your next story?
Well, apparently, parents in Boston are being outraged over a grade manipulation scandal in Baltimore's school system. Earlier this month, the Project Baltimore, which is an investigative reporting initiative, which was launched in March of this year by Sinclair Broadcast Group, uncovered a Baltimore City school with 0 students proficient in math and the highest graduation rate in the area. And, I mean, those two just do not compute, folks. Do not compute at all. The school is found in Northwood Uphold Community Academy 2, or NACA 2, after teachers contacted Project Baltimore saying grades were being lifted up so students could graduate.
They participated.
Yeah, they
We don't want to harm their little tiny egos.
Yeah.
You can't have a trigger moment. So what if they didn't show up to class at all? Well, they don't deserve an F. We're going to give them an A.
Now, there are many horrific examples of abuse of children, but such abuse intellectually, Mike, is visited much more on the poor and minority students as their alleged education in low-income areas. And if any kid is not being prepared for achievement intellectually, academically, and in real life goals, this is a travesty against that child's future. As though the highest possible outcomes for these kids scream drug dealer, gang member, and thoroughly addicted adult. That's not a pretty set of outcomes.
Unless you're a heroin dealer, then that's the way it's supposed to work.
And I wanted to remind our readers and listeners that the film Stand and Deliver was based on a real-life situation with a teacher in the LA area who refused to take failure on the part of his math class to be the norm. And I remember one great line in the film, and these are primarily South Mesoamericans and Mexican Americans, and he said, your ancestors were among some of the greatest mathematicians in the world. So what he did was he lifted them up, and he challenged them in a state-level math class, which they won very handily. But the school boards accused him of cheating, so he went back, prepared them again, and again they won handily. And why? Because this teacher saw potential and giftedness in these kids where others saw them as complete failures, barely graduating from school, and getting them from school either onto social services or juvenile hall, which were, in their minds, the outcome for these kids. And Mike, to me, that is so absolutely not true.
No, it is not true. And again, our education system, for the most part, doesn't educate anymore. It indoctrinates.
Yeah. And one of the things we need to do in this country, if we want the country to grow as a nation, is that all parents start working in tandem with the schools they go to. Don't think that education is solely...
Oh, the schools don't want to talk to the parents anymore. Remember Common Core? The teachers weren't even allowed to show the curriculum to the parents of the students.
Yeah.
There's the music.
Kinda
It's
bites.
time for us to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program, assuming they're not washing away down the streets of Round Rock, Texas. We'll be back on Monday. Everyone in the hurricane path, keep your head down. Stay safe. Stay safe. Please. Absolutely. Yeah. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.